Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 23 playthrough of the Colorado Rockies. We have recently completed our 5th season as general manager in Colorado, and we just won our 2nd consecutive World Series championship. So this rebuild has gone exceedingly well, helped by new ownership that is very generous in terms of what they allow us to do financially. But after a 113-win regular season, one of the great seasons in baseball history, we did get the job done in the playoffs. We took out the Chicago White Sox, who were the second best team in baseball, 4-2 in the 2053 World Series. It was not an easy chore to get there, quite honestly. We had an epic battle in the LCS with the Washington Nationals, who were the second best team in the National League behind us this year. 99-win team that it took us 7 games to get past. But when all was said and done, our Rockies are the champions, as I mentioned, for a second year in a row. And with OOTP 24 coming out just about a week and a half from now, if everything goes according to schedule, there's a temptation to leave on a high note and retire here with a second straight championship. But those of you who have been watching our 3 OOTP 23 series over the past, closing in on a year at this point, may recall that we did win 3 consecutive championships with the Kansas City Royals. And given that we've got about a week and a half till OOTP 24 comes out, we're going to come back for at least one more season to see if we can match those Royals with 3 titles in a row. So we will be back for the 2054 season. But before we do that, we're going to take a look back at the players that led us to this championship and also start previewing some of the difficult decisions that we're going to have to make this offseason, because right now, at least, we've got very limited money available to spend next year. And although we did win the World Championship this year, we still lost $35 million on the season. And one of ownership's goals for next year is for us to end with a balance of $25,000. You can see we're over 50,000 or 50 million. I may have been saying thousands. We're over 50 million away from that goal. So although ownership is focused on winning, and we have once again won it all, I don't know if they are going to continue providing us with the stratospheric level of increases they have as far as our budget next year, which could definitely make it more challenging to pursue a three-peat. Would also make it more challenging for us to make some of our off-season decisions. If you've been following closely, you do know that Rogelio Loera, one of the great pitchers in baseball history, ruptured his UCL several months ago, missed most of this year, although he was named an All-Star with that 6-1 record and 2.65 ERA after winning the Cy Young Award for us last season in his first year with the team. We've got a $36 million team option on him for next year, clearly with the expectation that he is going to be 41 years old and miss a good chunk of the season. We will be declining that option despite the brilliant career that he's had, and despite the fact that at this point he's only 4 wins away from a 300th career victory. But that will certainly open up a little bit more money for us. But it's still, with the fact that we have some big numbers on the books in some of the free agents we've brought on in recent years and some of the players that we've traded for, and we also have some young players that are headed for big arbitration numbers, it's certainly going to be a challenge to bring back almost all of this team regardless of the budget we end up with next year. I guess if we get a 50 million increase or something, then I'll have to walk back that statement, but I am not anticipating a 50 million increase to a budget of 380 million. So taking one final look at our stats from the entire season, we got off to a 500 start in March, and then after that, the lowest winning percentage we had in any month was 629 in April, and we played over 700 baseball in May, June, and July. So it was a fantastic season, as we've talked about. We ended up scoring over 1,000 runs, first in the National League. We're first in the vast majority of the offensive categories. And then pitching-wise, we ended up third in runs allowed, which for a team playing half of its games in Coors Field is pretty remarkable. I'd say even more remarkable than that was the fact that our starters' ERA was the best in the league. Our bullpen was kind of average. But as we've talked about in the past, if you're putting up average-ish type numbers, playing half of your games in Coors Field, as a pitching staff, probably not the worst thing in the world. And you can see we were in the top 6 or 7 in a heck of a lot of pitching categories. Defensive efficiency, not incredibly great. Zone rating was actually pretty good, though, so mixed results defensively. But certainly, all in all, anytime you win 113 games, 63 at home, and even still have an over 600 winning percentage on the road, it's going to be a pretty successful season, and it certainly was. And the good news about our pitching staff, even with the fact that we're going to be losing the guy who was our number one starter in Rogelio Loera, the 5 starters that we have on the team right now are all pretty darn good, and they are all signed for next season too. So from that perspective, we are in a good spot with the pitching staff. Dave Alvarado, 18-5, 2.95 ERA, brought him on board after our first year as GM of this club in 2049, and he has been a leader of our pitching staff ever since then. Javi Toledo we picked up as a free agent the year after that, and then the other 3 starters, Jose Ortega, Gus Duran, and Jose Vasquez, are players who we have picked up in trade the last few years. Gus Duran, we picked him up before the trade deadline, right after that season-ending injury to Loera. Wanted to ensure that we had 5 pitchers for the starting rotation that we really liked to guarantee that we'd have a 4-man rotation. Not guarantee, but give us the best assurance possible that we'd have at least 4 of those starting pitchers healthy when we got to the postseason. As it turned out, all 5 of the starters were healthy when we got to the postseason, which enabled us to put Javi Toledo into the closer role for the postseason, where he picked up 6 saves for us throughout the playoffs and generally did a pretty solid job for us in that role. Turning to our bullpen, feel like we've got a lot of quality out there. And we also have been running with a 12-man pitching staff for the last few years because we also have a lot of stamina among our relievers in general, which allows us to have some players in the bullpen who we could slot into starting roles when we have the inevitable injuries, but also gives us players who can definitely go more than an inning or 2 out of the bullpen if necessary. Our closer this year was Tawase Arabamge. Had a rough year, saved 35 games for us, but a 5.21 ERA. Did strike out 89 and 67 in the 3rd innings. His BABIP of 343 is something that we hope will get better next year. Would think that he is right now penciled in as our closer again for next season. He's making a lot of money. He is a player, as we talked about, that we think could start if we needed to. But the hope is that he will be back as closer next year. Chase Crawford, another pitcher who can both start or relieve for us and has certainly been a closer for us in the past. Had a couple of long stints on the DL, or IL, I guess to use proper terminology, the IL this year. You can see he was reasonably effective when he was healthy with a 3.14 ERA and a strikeout and a half per inning. The issue is he only pitched 14 1/3 innings. Will Lucio, another really good pitcher, another guy who could definitely start for us, and feel like we've wasted him a bit by not getting more innings out of him and having in the starting rotation, but went 4-2 for us this year, 3.10 ERA and 100 strikeouts in 87 innings. The two veteran lefties, Victor Fields and Latrell Young, are the two players we have among the pitchers who are going to be free agents next year. Not sure whether we'll bring them back. Latrell Young is 37. He's also one of the few pitchers on our team that's neutral as far as his ground ball and fly ball tendencies, and he definitely regressed a bit this past season. So likely we'll be moving on from him. Victor Fields we would love to have back. He's still in the prime of his career, closing in on his 30th birthday in a couple of days. Has a really nice profile for Coors. The issue is he wants to be a starter, and he's also looking for about $13 million a year. We don't have a spot for him in the rotation, and I don't know that we can afford to spend $13 million a year on another reliever when we're already spending close to that much on Adebamge. I guess there's an argument maybe we trade away Adebamge, try to bring Fields back. That's certainly something to think about as well. And last but not least in the bullpen are the two other lefties. Elijah Smith, the number 15 prospect in baseball, was our third-round draft pick 3 years ago. Finally made it to the majors at the end of this year in a relief role, and certainly will be part of the pitching staff next year. The question is whether we will try to open up a spot for him in the starting rotation or let him work out of the bullpen as a rookie. The only knock on him is that he is neutral as far as his ground to fly ball tendencies. You can see we've definitely focused on the extreme ground ballers as we've built this well-adapted for Colorado pitching staff over the years. But certainly Elijah Smith looks like he has the stuff to be effective regardless of where he's pitching. And then Juan Vargas is another one of our former starters due to the embarrassment of riches we have in the rotation. We moved him into the pen. I think next year is the last year of his contract, second to last year, and then we'll have a team option for his age 40 season. But he will be back next year. So not a ton of openings on the pitching staff. As I mentioned, Latrell Young is almost certainly gone. Victor Fields may price himself out of the organization. And then, of course, we're going to be moving on from Rogelio Loera. But we do already have in AAA Javon Williams, another pitcher who doesn't have the perfect tendencies for Coors Field, but was extremely effective in both AAA and the majors this year and is likely deserving of a role next year. So we may have one spot, two spots to fill in the pitching staff tops, but feel that we are in really good shape with our pitchers as we start our initial preparations for 2054, even though in the locker room they're still celebrating the championship right now. Turning to our everyday players, and not surprisingly, it's a little bit of an embarrassment of riches here as well. Starting catcher Alex Alvarez will be back with us next year. He's done well since we picked him up in a mid-year trade with Detroit 2.5 seasons ago. Hit just .249 this year, but did knock 21 balls out of the park and 466 at-bats. Still well below average in terms of his OPS plus and his WRC plus, but was a positive WAR player thanks to his really good defense. We have him signed next year, so he'll be back with us again. Could be moving on from Chris Rodriguez, though. He was a respectable backup catcher for us once again this season, but he's headed into free agency, and certainly if there's an opportunity to bring on a big-time catcher and put Alvarez into a backup role, or bring on a backup who we think is better than Chris Rodriguez, those are things that we will look at this offseason. In two core players who will definitely be back with us next year are first baseman Adam Fields and Elijah Moore. Fields has typically been our designated hitter. Picked him up in the Rule 5 draft 3 years ago. He made the jump to the majors. We were able to keep him on the roster all year, and he has this year developed into one of the top players, at least the top hitters in baseball. 322 average, 46 homers, 138 ribbies, 4.3 WAR on the season. He's getting into his arbitration years, but certainly at 6.6-ish million next year is still a bargain for the production that he puts up. Elijah Moore, similar to Adam Fields, another player who's going to get some MVP votes without a doubt. Elijah Moore just missed out by about 12 points in his batting average on winning a Triple Crown last year. Hit exactly 300 again this year. Not as great an all-around season. His doubles, his triples were down. His slugging percentage didn't lead the league. In his OPS didn't either, although those numbers were actually up from a year ago. But he did hit 61 homers to prevent a St. Louis player from winning the Triple Crown, who led the league in ribbies and batting average. Put up an even higher WAR than he did a year ago. Certainly not expecting him to win the MVP award because of, and I forget his name, Manny Fernandez from St. Louis, as I mentioned, was one home run away from winning the Triple Crown and led the league in hits, ribbies, average, on base, slugging, OPS, WRC plus, and WAR, while also playing first base like our friend Elijah Moore does. But at the very least, Elijah Moore is permanently in the record books now, leading the league in homers 2 straight years. And that 61 home run total that he put up this year could be argued as the clean National League record at this point. Second base is a position where we had, once again, an embarrassment of riches this year. Danny Ruiz started for us there or at third base much of the year, hit .326 with 23 homers. He's a guy we brought on in a trade with Seattle at this point 4 years ago to be kind of a super utility guy for us. You can see he can play a lot of positions, and he can play a lot of positions well defensively. Really happy to have had him on board the last few years. Love his durability. The issue is he's a free agent now, and he is looking for about $28 million a year. Certainly we could use the money from Rogelio Loera to bring him back, but that's going to be a very big number for a player who we love. I love the defensive versatility. I love the fact that he's got a respectable bat that's proven to be a pretty good bat, in cores at least, compared to what he looks like in terms of his ratings. But I don't know that he's a $28 million a year player, so we're going to have to see what the budget looks like. And then we brought Demetrius Washington, the veteran, on board from Cleveland right at the trade deadline just to give us some more depth as we were pursuing the title this year. He hit .273 with 8 homers and 176 at-bats. He's looking for even more money than Danny Ruiz, looking for about $37 million a year. So the fragile, soon-to-be 33-year-old will certainly not be back with us. But backup catcher and potentially second base, if we move on from Ruiz, are likely to be the 2 holes that we'll be looking to fill this offseason, either through bringing players who are on our team back, free agency, trade, maybe even the Rule 5 draft. Who knows? And turning to the left side of our infield, we should have a little more stability here next year than we're going to have at second base, most likely. Alex Ortega will likely be back at third. Suffered a lot of injury issues this year, hit .241 with 7 homers and just 162 at-bats. Hopefully he'll be healthy again next year. He is certainly a respectable defensive third baseman, has good home run power, going to be 30 years old before the start of next year. His contract's starting to get up there a little bit, but I guess the only positive thing of him missing so much time this year is that he probably would have had a bigger bump in his arbitration estimate had he been healthier and put up a year like he put up in 2051 or 2052 when he averaged 25 homers a year for us. But with the money he's making, I would think that he'll probably be back for us at third base once again. Jordan Casares, who had been our starting shortstop for a couple of years, moved into more of a utility role this year after we made a trade around the All-Star break. He's been a pretty productive hitter for us in 2 of the 3 seasons that he's been here. Clearly has a really good glove, good speed, good bunter, brings some things to the offense that we don't have as much with other players. The concern is he's in his 30s now and he's fragile as far as his injury proneness. So the fact that he doesn't have a great bat and he's injury prone, and the fact that we knew we would likely be facing a real difficult decision on Danny Ruiz this year contributed us to making a trade before the All-Star break for Israel Mays, who likely is our starting shortstop next year, but we could certainly end up in a position where he's our starting second baseman and Casares is back at short in some scenarios, depending on what the free agent and trade markets look like and how much money we really end up having to spend. But Mays was very productive after we brought him over from Toronto, hitting .343 with 22 doubles and 169 at-bats. Expected to get a nice bump to around $8.5 million in arbitration, but certainly will happily have him back at shortstop for us next season. In turning to our outfield, as many productive players as we have in our infield, with guys who hit 46, 61, 34, and 23 home runs, not all with us in the case of Demetrius Washington. But our outfield could still be argued as the strength of the team offensively when we look at our starting left, center, and right fielders. The fewest homers we got out of anybody were 33. The fewest ribbies we got out of anybody were 86. So some very big bats in the outfield, as you would expect from a team with a good offense. Robbie Carrillo will be back as our left fielder. Batting average dipped to .275 this year. You can see that trend over his first few years in Colorado. A little bit frightening, but a 126 OPS plus, 138 WRC plus are still very good offensive seasons. He had led the National League in runs 2 straight years, triples 2 straight years, his first couple seasons with us. So I guess it's a bit of an off year, but 275, 3695 with a 914 OPS. If that's an off year, we'll take it. Brought on Eddie Farley this year to become our starting center fielder. He was our big free agent acquisition last year. Did have some injury issues, played in only 110 games, but was pretty productive. Batting average of .231, not going to impress anybody, but did have 27 doubles and 33 home runs and 428 at-bats. OPS plus and WRC plus well above average, and a WAR of 3.9, in part driven by his excellent defense in center field. He'll be back next year, and then Bobby Perez will be back in right field. Former Rookie of the Year for us a couple of seasons ago, led the National League with 126 runs this year. His batting average also dipped to .241, so that was a common theme among our outfielders this year, but did hit 39 homers and 86 ribbies. Not quite at the levels he put up in his Rookie of the Year campaign, but still a very productive season. And then I like our backup outfielders as well. I don't think we're going to really be making any changes at all here. Angel Gomez was a minor league free agent signing about 2 years ago at this point. Spent most of last year in the minors, came up at just the end of the season, and then spent this whole year in the majors as a fourth outfielder for us. Hit .319 with 20 doubles and 11 homers and 276 at-bats. He can also play the infield a little bit if needed, and looks like he has an above-average major league bat. He's durable, and he's also a switch hitter. So just a lot of things to like about him, and he's also got a good personality in the clubhouse. I guess I can't say enough good things about Gomez, but for a fourth outfielder, a backup corner infielder, pretty useful guy to have on the roster. And then Hector Rivera, also a minor league free agent signing from just a year ago, though. Tried to have him spend as much time as possible in AAA this year because, as you can see, he's still, according to our scout, is not completely developed, but did bring him up towards the end of the year. And he was also up earlier in the year as well. Hit .273 for us with 7 homers and 132 at-bats. Excellent defensive outfielder, has some speed, and we think with that gap power and that speed, the combination of doubles and triples and some home runs that he did put on display this year in both AAA and the majors is likely to remain a strength of his, playing half of his games in the expanses of Coors Field. So that was the summary of the key players that helped deliver a second consecutive championship for the Rockies and allowed us to avoid bitter playoff disappointment after a 113-win season. So it's time to sim ahead now to find out what ownership thinks of what we did over the course of the season, what they're going to give us as far as a budget, and then to also finally make the official decision on Rogelio Loera, as well as a couple. I think there's at least one other player that we'll have a team option on that I think we were leaning towards picking up, but I can't even remember who it is offhand. But we'll see that shortly when we get the emails. And we did get the nice bump in fan interest from winning the World Series. The off-season starts tomorrow, so we'll sim ahead one more day and then find out where we stand with ownership and a budget for the upcoming season. And before we turn to the emails, we'll take one brief moment to celebrate our World Series trophy. Season score 1,109 out of 1,000. Clearly a 113-win team that wins the World Series is pretty much as close as you can get to a big score. I'm guessing this was probably the highest score that we've had, 1,109. Oh, actually it wasn't. Kind of interesting. The only season that we had with a higher score was 1,126. And that was our second consecutive World Series championship with the Royals when we were on the three-peat. So maybe that's a harbinger that we will get the three-peat next year. You can see that we are now, how many years into this playthrough? How many years haven't we made the playoffs? 4, 5, 6, 7. So 32 seasons as a GM now. 25 playoff appearances, 7 World Series championships, and coming back for next season will give Old School Sports the opportunity to get a 3,000th win, barring some very unforeseen circumstance as a Major League general manager. And as I mentioned, there are just the two option year decisions. Chase Crawford, we've got him for next year at $2.5 million if we want him. Certainly a 33-year-old who's an extreme ground ball pitcher, throws in the mid to high 90s. Really good movement on his pitches, has proven to be an effective pitcher in Colorado for us over the last couple of years. A guy who can start if we need him to, despite the injuries this year. Still normal as far as his injury proneness. So that to me is a pretty easy one to execute that option. Rogelio Loera, team option of $36 million. As I mentioned, 8 months till he's back from that ruptured UCL. So earliest we'd probably see him is the All-Star break. He's recently turned 41 years old, and his ratings just continue to drop. Obviously, we wouldn't want to re-scout him before potentially bringing him back as a free agent, but I think at this point, he was a Cy Young Award winner for us last year, but age and then a couple of injuries, including the real serious ruptured UCL, seem to have finally brought this incredible pitcher, who, as I mentioned, is 4 wins away from 300 in his career, and he's struck out over 6,300 batters. Can see he led the American League, or I guess in one case the National League. Actually, that year he just kind of led all of baseball in strikeouts, but he had a long streak from when he was 22 to 34, where he led the league in strikeouts 12 consecutive seasons. He did lead the league in strikeouts for us last year. He's averaged well over 300 strikeouts a season, just an incredible career. But at $36 million for a 41-year-old who looks like they have a average-ish at best skill profile at this point, pretty easy decision for us to void that contract year and move on from Mr. Loera. Fans won't like it when he signs with somebody else, but I think it's the right financial decision for the Rockies. And we'll be patient to find out the most interesting news on our season goals and the budget. Arbitration in the off-season obviously beginning. Off-season today, arbitration will be coming up shortly. Top prospect list, no Rockies among the top 10, but as we talked about, we are expecting Elijah Smith to be a very important pitcher for us going forward. Looks like we have a few minor league staff members retiring and leaving. Let's check in on our season goals. Very pleased that we won a championship. Fantastic job. Unhappy that we didn't improve enough in defensive efficiency. Unhappy that we haven't increased profit. Happy with his overall performance. Ecstatic when he considers on and off field considerations. Wants us to win another championship next year. Still get that balance to $25 million and to build a dynasty in the next 4 years. So still a lot of pressure, and let's see what type of budget we'll have to handle that pressure. $344 million for the upcoming season. So that is a modest increase from 330, but it does give us more money. And you can see with the fact that we moved on from that $36 million obligation to Loera, that it does open up some money for us. We don't have a ton of holes to fill. Starting second baseman is the most glaring. If we let both Ruiz and Washington leave, which is certainly possible. Catcher is another need that I think we certainly need a backup at the very least, and if we could find somebody who's better at Alvarez to start, that would be fine too. And then we probably need to add one arm to the pitching staff for the bullpen. So it's going to be kind of a unique circumstance compared to other off seasons for us when we've tended to really focus on the pitching. I think this year there's not a ton we need to do with the pitching, but we've got an obvious hole at second base that we need to either fill or refill with someone who's already on the team. And then, as I talked about, maybe look for a catcher. But other than that, not a ton to do. And we should have a decent amount of money to proceed with. So we're now up to the 5th highest budget in baseball. Right now we're 7th in player payroll. So this is a far cry from when we started this playthrough about 11 months ago with the Kansas City Royals, and then moved on to the Pittsburgh Pirates and penny pinching Bob Nutting for over a decade. And even when we started out here with Colorado, they were definitely a middle of the pack type team in terms of their budget, but is definitely increased dramatically from the $200 million that we had in our first season up to $344 million today. Player development, we're still in decent shape. Certainly, it's kind of weird. Elijah Smith, I guess, has now looked at the 30th best prospect in baseball since we've moved forward to the next year. I don't know why he would have dropped that much, but he's going to be in the majors for us anyways. But we're now looking at the 9th best farm system in all of baseball. We did have to trade away one of our top prospects, the 2nd best prospect in our system, to bring on Gus Giron when Loera went down with that injury. Check in on how Cameron Miller did after we let him go. I know that Cleveland had brought him up to the majors, and he did end up spending the rest of the season in the majors after we made that trade. Started 12 games, 4-6 with a 5.51 ERA. Only allowed 56 hits in 63 2/3 innings, but 35 walks and 36 strikeouts. Definitely not the ratio that they would be looking for and hoping for from him. So we certainly got the good part of that deal for this year with Gus Giron contributing to a World Series championship for us. But obviously there is a lot to still be written as far as Cameron Miller's future career and what he ends up achieving at the major league level. And before we finish up the episode, we'll take a look at some of the potential free agents. Mentioned that second base is potentially our biggest hole that we're going to need to fill. And you can see that two of the top handful of players on the market are on our team right now in Demetrius Washington, looking for in the mid-30s, and Danny Ruiz likely looking in the mid-20s. Definitely not going to bring Washington back. With the money we have, Ruiz may make some sense. I think it's definitely overpaying. His demand has come down, I guess, a tiny bit since the last time we checked in. But it's all familiar, well, not all familiar names, but a lot of names that are familiar to me. Demetrius Washington and Danny Ruiz on the team this year. Rogelio Terrazas was a second baseman for us for a few years. We traded him away knowing that he was going to be a free agent, used him as the cornerstone of the deal to bring on shortstop Israel Mays. He's looking for almost $18 million a year. Juan Castillo is a guy we've had in both Pittsburgh and Colorado, more of a utility infielder at this point, but certainly would be a respectable guy coming off the bench. $8 million, a little much for that, but he could be in the mix also. And then Tony Caceres is a guy who we had last season as a utility infielder for us as well, also looking for relatively big money. And you can see there's several other second basemen to consider also. We'll factor in the cost, the injury proneness, the personalities, and of course their actual ability on the baseball field when we start making those decisions. But again, we are still a few weeks away from figuring out which of these players are actually going to be free agents, because we've got to get through arbitration, and teams certainly have an opportunity to sign players before they hit free agency. And we could obviously do something similar with Washington or Ruiz if we thought that was the right path, now that we know how much money we're going to have to spend, and given that we do kind of have a high-level overview of the type of second baseman that might be available on the open market. And turning to catcher, the pickings on the free agent market are potentially going to be a little more slim. Chris Rodriguez was our backup this year. He's obviously available. Demetrius Williams had been a backup for us a few years ago. At his age and his fragility, probably wouldn't look to bring him back. Jose Ramirez actually spent this year in AAA for us. He has no interest in signing a contract with us now. He wants to test free agency after we kept him in the minors all year. The most highly regarded guy out there at catcher is Julio Cibrian, who certainly looks like the epitome of average at a very high level, with his contact, power, eye, and fielding ratings all being 50, his normal signability, his normal intelligence, his normal work ethic, his normal leadership. I'm sure when we actually look closely into him, he's not perfectly average. See, he's really good at avoiding strikeouts. His catcher ability a little above average, his arm a little below average. Left-handed hitter is a catcher, which could be interesting. We are a little right-handed heavy in terms of our lineup, so I don't know that we want to be spending $11 million a year on him, but certainly we'll be looking for help at catcher, either in the free agent market or perhaps in trade. And you never know about the Rule 5 either. It's always something to keep an eye on. I can't imagine we're going to get a big-time backup catcher in the Rule 5, but stranger things have happened. But before we get to free agency, we've got a lot of things to figure out on our own team. As I mentioned, we've got a number of players headed to arbitration, and then we're also going to most notably need to figure out what we want to do with Danny Ruiz and Victor Fields. I think we're most likely moving on from Chris Rodriguez and Latrell Young. And then obviously there's a bunch of free agents, most notably Demetrius Washington and Rogelio Loera, who we won't be receiving any compensation for, but are freeing up a good amount of payroll from us. So we've got a lot to think about, and we'll start focusing on the arbitration aspect of those decisions in our next episode, when we'll also find out who the award winners are. As I said, I think that the likes of Moore and Fields and probably some of our outfielders will be getting a bunch of votes for the MVP, but I don't think we're going to have a most valuable player. Pitching, we got, Dave Alvarado is not a bad Cy Young Award candidate. He didn't lead the league in anything, but still went 18-5 with a 2.95 ERA, over 200 strikeouts, 5.9 WAR, 327 SIERA. I imagine he will get some Cy Young Award votes. And we will find out the results of all of those elections and votes in our next episode. We'll also figure out exactly what we're going to do with arbitration, make the potential big decisions that we have as to whether we want to perhaps make an offer to Ruiz preemptively before he hits free agency, and then have final preparations for free agency in our next episode. Until then, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day. And Aaron Rodgers, if you're watching, it's time to tell the Packers you want to go to the Jets.